where Democratic governors believe they need to lay the foundation for the future of the party. What's next? That was the consensus coming out of their annual meeting over the weekend in California. They also warned about letting President-elect Trump and his administration set the agenda, calling for pitches that focus on improving voters' everyday lives. Meanwhile, a survey from Pew Research Center follows November's election shows Democrats are currently more pessimistic about their party's future than at any point over the last 8 years. Joining us now, former senior spokesperson and advisor for the Harris campaign, Adrienne Elrod, back on the show.
Adrienne,
good to have you.
Perfect time to have you
Morning,
here.
guys.
I'm going to talk about somebody that you know because you're from Arkansas. I interviewed Bill Clinton last week, and I will tell you, President Clinton was optimistic. You know, he wasn't sitting there wringing his hands going, oh, my God, what do we do? What do we do? He, as always, he got right to the heart of the matter. He goes, we got to meet people where they are, right? And he said,
yep.
I actually said it for him. I said, you know, I was focused on democracy. I was focused on fascist rhetoric. And he said, yeah, people were focused on gas prices and grocery bills. You gotta meet people where they are, or they're not going to vote for you. Talk about that, and talk about how, again, how Bill Clinton always seems to boil it down to, again, what's the most essential part of the campaign.
Yeah, Joe, first of all, it's great to be back with you and Mika and the whole crew here. I watched the interview. It was such a great discussion between the two of you. And there's a couple of things here. I mean, yes, you're exactly right. We've got to get back to those bread and butter issues, those kitchen table issues, which, by the way, Democrats are the ones who are passing the policies that address those issues. When you look at President Biden's record, 4 major economic bills, can you imagine what our lives would look like right now if he hadn't passed the American Rescue Plan right after COVID? Inflation would have been a record high. But how do we translate what we are doing as Democrats, the policies that we are passing? How do we translate that to how we are going to affect the everyday lives of the American people, lowering those gas prices, lowering food costs, improving schools? There's such a disconnect there in our party, and it's not because of one human being. It's not because of one elected official. It is a collective effort. So I think we've got to get back to being able to effectively communicate about what we are fighting for as Democrats and how that is going to improve the lives of the American people. You and President Clinton had such a great conversation. But he's exactly right. We have to meet people where they are. Right. And if we can kind of get the rub there, where we can talk about what we're fighting for, what we've done, but also what we want to do in the future. Because, of course, as we all know, elections are about the future, not the past. I think we can start to get back on the road to the recovery. And something else, Joe, I want to mention when we talk about how some Democrats think, oh, gosh, we've got to start all over. We need new leadership. We have to completely revamp where we are as a party. Let me just put this in perspective. In 2004, when John Kerry lost his election as president, we had 44 Democrats in the Senate. And I think we had about minus 28 to 30 seats in the House. I was part of Rahm Emanuel's team when he chaired the DCCC in 2006, where we won back the House, we won back the Senate. Chuck Schumer, of course, his leadership at the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. Right. We're in a far better circumstance at this point, right? We are down several seats in the House, and we are only down 3 seats in the Senate. So Democrats are in a much better situation. We picked up some crucial down-ballot Senate seats in this election. We narrowed the margins in the House. I think we're actually sitting right where we need to be as Democrats, where whatever Trump and the Republicans can't pass, that is going to be on them because Democrats have no power. So we're not in these dire straits that some Democrats think that we are in this country, but we do have a lot of work to do when it comes to communicating with the voters of this country.
Well, and Adrienne, that's another thing. Bill Clinton was optimistic. And I actually heard people who'd spoken with Barack Obama. He's not wringing his hands thinking that it's the end of the world. Optimistic because they know that 2 years things can be dramatically different. Obviously, everybody's concerned about what's going to happen over the next 2 years. But you look at that Pew poll, and it says Democrats are more pessimistic than they've been in 8 years. Bill Clinton will tell you it was a 1% election.
Yep.
The national vote, 1%. Wisconsin, less than 1%. Michigan, a little more than 1%. Pennsylvania, 1.5%. That is, as we said on this show for a month, a tie. So
Yep.
I think it's crazy, and I want us all to talk about this, but I'll start with you, Adrian. You know, I'm reading all of these things that say, oh, now Elon Musk shows the vision for the future, and it's all X this and the bro culture, and it's the end of blah, blah, blah. 1%. I will tell you, if it had been 1% in the other direction, we would be hearing Elon Musk, the failure of all failures. He has destroyed his empire. The bro culture is officially the exaggeration over 1% is just terminally stupid. And one final thing, too, with all of this talk about the amazing things that happened because of Elon. And I'm not just talking about Elon. That's just everybody's talking about Elon Musk, X, bro culture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 1% is the big difference here. And if it had changed and gone in the other direction, everybody would be talking differently about everything right now. It's just the overgeneralization, and the Democratic infighting really, really seems overcooked.
Thank you, Joe, for saying that. You really tee that up perfectly. I mean, a couple of things. Number one, as you and Mika have talked about on the show a lot, Democrats, we tend to be Debbie Downers. We tend to be negative Nancys, you know, when we shouldn't be. I mean, 75 million people and counting voted for Kamala Harris. So let's lay that groundwork. I mean, she did very well in a number of states, and certainly in the states that we invested in, the battleground states that we invested in, she outperformed where you know, dramatically where we would have if we had not played in those states. Number one. Number two. Yes, Donald Trump decisively won this election. There's no question about that. But it was not a mandate. I mean, you look at Michigan with Alyssa Slotkin. You look at some of these down-ballot races that outperform the national ticket. Democrats have a lot to be proud of and a lot to be optimistic about. But we do have a lot of work when it comes to how are we going to bring back some of those working-class voters. We've lost Latino voters, I think, at a rate of 29% since 2012. That is not sustainable. You know, we were able to cobble together a coalition of a lot of moderate Republicans this election cycle, and I think a lot of that had to do with Trump. But are we going to be able to maintain that coalition going forward? You know, how are we going to get back some of those Clinton voters, you know, in the 90s that voted for him because of that centrist leadership, where he was putting them first? He was talking about, how am I going to fight for the American people? How am I going to fight to lower their costs? It's the economy, stupid. Sure, that was something that we talked about this election cycle, but there is still a disconnect, you know, as a party, not one individual. This is not on President Biden. This is not on Vice President Harris. This is a collective party issue of how do we get back to demonstrating to voters in America that we are the ones fighting to lower their costs, to improve their lives, because that is exactly what we are doing.
And Rev, no doubt Democrats have some soul searching to do, but to the point here, they also had an unpopular incumbent and also global forces. We see post-pandemic Democratic leaders across the globe either losing power entirely or at least being dramatically weakened. Republicans' margins are slim. The Trump administration, if guilty of overreach, Democrats could be just fine in 2 years.
I think Adrian is right. I think that there needs to be an analysis, but all of the bedwetting, I think, is counterproductive. It was a 1% race. Yes, we need to do an analysis of how we deal with the price of groceries and all, more in our rhetoric and in what is being sold. But let's not throw out the fact that Joe Biden was a good president that did very substantive, consequential things. And we shouldn't back away from that. And all of this about bringing in just people because they're young, if they're able, yes, we need young leadership. But we just saw the country elect a 78-year-old man. They didn't bring in young leadership in the Republicans. They talked to their base, and their base came out. We need to not sacrifice any part of the base.
All right, Adrian Elrod, thank you very much. Great to have you back on the show. Good to see you.